Welcome, everybody. This is Next Vista for Learning, and you have joined the fascinating folks, educators engaging edupreneurs inaugural webinar. And what we have from Next Vista is a free library of videos. It's creative takes on educational topics, stories of communities and service to others, help for those learning English, interviews about careers, loads of recordings with advice for teachers, these kinds of things. Our mission is to highlight creative approaches to teaching and learning through our projects and contests, and we hope you'll take an interest in that. The Fascinating Folks, Educators Engaging Edupreneurs effort is one designed to foster creative and productive conversations between educators and entrepreneurs in the learning sector, and we welcome your feedback on how to make this as inspiring as possible. Our presenter today is Brett Kopf. He is the CEO and co-founder of Remind, and he is well known to educators who have used that app because it's one of the most successful educational apps of all time, I believe one can say. He grew up in Illinois, where he was diagnosed in 5th grade with ADD and with dyslexia. And a particular teacher helped him in ways that made him think, you know, if I can help teachers like that teacher, that would be great. And that is how he has lived his life. And so he is a fascinating and wonderfully interesting, humble guy. I'm really excited to have him tell us about Omella, which is his current project. And with that, Brett, I hand it over to you.
Great, thank you. It's nice to meet everyone. Fred, I know that you're on the short clock, so I'm going to be very quick and efficient, and then we could just move it up to open to Q&A just because it's a nice, small, intimate group. One more. Hello, Janine. So I'll tell you about Omella in a second, but more importantly, I want to explain why I'm here. I spent over probably 13 years trying to solve this problem of removing this barrier that existed between educators, teachers, school leaders, coaches, and their students and parents. And I actually started Remind. We just celebrated our 10-year anniversary, but it's not public. I don't know if it's actually publicly known. I really started it 3 years before that in 2008. And I just hit my head against the wall, not literally, but metaphorically speaking, for years trying to solve this problem. And at the time, we were just using BlackBerries. And I was texting all my friends, and I thought to myself, like, well, if I can do that with my friends, why can't I do that with everyone else in education? Because that's how I, as at the time, 18-year-old, communicate. And so through a bunch of learning lessons and struggles, we ended up building Remind because I had this teacher that totally changed my life. And the core ethos of the company has never changed. And so Remind makes it really easy for a teacher, student, parent, school to be able to communicate easily and safely with a bunch of students and parents. And fortunately, it's got very big. So we have over 30 million active users. A little bit over 70% of teachers in the US use it. They send north of 100 million messages a day. And I know that these numbers sound absolutely insane. They still are to me, but it all started with a group of 10 of them. And actually, Rushton was one of the first, I think, 100 that I've ever spoken to. And as a founder, I am extremely mission driven and very, very customer focused. So, and Rushton knows this because I've given a few talks to his class. And when I say talk, I actually talk less and I listen more because I don't actually think my job as an entrepreneur is to have this revolutionary idea of what education should look like. I think actually the people on the ground doing it, teachers, school leaders know that. And the role of technology, I believe, should be to reduce friction and augment, to make them more powerful and efficient in order to help their students and or parents. And that is very true with Remind. Like, I have a very strong belief that Remind's job should be to help augment the power of a school leader. And part of that is we do our tiny part in helping reach students and parents and making teachers way more efficient. So that is like the background. When I was building it, I noticed that a lot of teachers were struggling in what we think of as their like back office in trying to collect money and ticket sales and donations. Sometimes there's a coach was selling merchandise like a t-shirt, or maybe the PTA was using it. And even sometimes if it was a private school or some type of ancillary organization like DECA, they would have to collect information or even digital signatures on field trips. And so there was all these things that they were doing, which was incredibly inefficient. And whenever I see inefficiency and that's like connected to an educator, I think like, I wonder if technology can eliminate that inefficiency so the educator can do what they should be, which is leading or coaching or teaching, or frankly, doing whatever the heck they want. And so I started this company called Omella, which makes it really easy for a teacher, school leader, PTA, club to collect any type of money, whether it's a ticket sale, a membership due, or even a donation, all in one place. And just as an analog, the way we think about it is if any of us, like if I was in San Antonio and Rachel, you and I were to go get a coffee, and if I owed you $10 because it was expensive coffee, I would Venmo you. But if I exist in this whole vertical of education, and if I go on a field trip and it costs $10 a kid, or if I'm a PTA and if I have to collect donations, or if I'm selling a t-shirt and it costs $50, majority of it happens by putting, Johnny putting a check in, or excuse me, Johnny's mom putting a check in his or her backpack, putting it in, they walk to school, they give it to the teacher. It's totally not transparent. There's very expensive transaction fees. And I just thought there had to be a better way, because the whole world is moving like that. Unfortunately, I believe that education tends to be a decade behind consumer internet. And we want to help accelerate it to bring education with everyone else. And I only mean that in the technological sense, not in the sense of, like, I feel very strong, I mentioned this before, that educators actually, they know how to teach, they know how to engage with their students. School leaders know how to lead. Our job isn't to teach them to do that. They know that. We're just trying to help make them more efficient so they can get back to doing what they love, which is leading. So the company's very early, but we're small. We have a handful of customers. We talk to them all the time. It's working and it's growing quite quickly, but we're, like Remind has 30 million users today. It all started with 100, and we're in a very similar stage with Omella. And it's as crazy as it sounds, we're doing something very similar again in this vertical because we really believe in it. We want to try to focus on verticals that we think have very big problems. There's very antiquated software, which, as I'm sure all of you know in education, that there is. And there's just a lot of inefficiencies. And there tends to be a lot of like red tape, and it's very difficult to attack. And what would scare a lot of people to attack that market excites us, because I think we have a good playbook to do it, which isn't anything fancy. It's really just talking to customers and listening to them a lot, and building products that help them. So our team's very small. There's 8 people. We're very experienced. It's 100% remote, not only because of the pandemic, it's just because we believe in it for a bunch of reasons. I didn't think I would like that because I'm an extrovert, as you can tell by me speaking. But I actually like it a lot, partially of which because I have a newborn and I get to hang out with him in between meetings for like 20 minutes, which is wonderful. But that is me in a nutshell. I would love to open up to Q&A, and I also have questions for all of you on what we're building to try to get feedback. And if you can't tell, I'm very informal and I'm an open book. And so if you want to talk, Janet, about starting a company and entrepreneurship and what that word actually means, because sometimes it doesn't only mean starting a company. I naively used to think that everyone should start companies. And then I started one and I was like, oh, I was such an idiot. Excuse the French. It's really hard. But there's other versions of being an entrepreneur, and I totally get that. So whether you want to talk about that or building a product, anything, I'm an open book to talk about those things. And it's very nice to be here, and thanks for coming.
Perfect. Thank you, Brett. And so everybody, what we'll do is let me know as you have questions, either by waving or having something in the chat, anything like that. And when you ask a question, if you would, just please give your name and where you are. So my name is Rushton. I am in San Jose, California. And Brett, I'll start the questions. You started Remind with your brother, right? And so you had this chance to like co-found a company with someone you know quite well. And do I remember correctly that he is your twin brother?
No, but some people mistaken us, even though, I have a beard and he doesn't, even though he's 2 years older than me. He's not a twin, but I'm the baby. I'm the 200-pound baby.
Given that you are 2 years separate, I'm very glad for your mother that you are not twins. All right.
Yeah. It was all hands on deck, even though as a new father, like I'm sure it was really, really hard because I can't imagine having two. I'm trying to battle one.
Now, in working with your brother to start Remind, pick out a lesson that was something in the space of, I didn't know this was something I was going to have to deal with, but it turned out I had to deal with it, and that ended up being far more interesting than I would have imagined. Is there something in that realm that allows us to, kind of think a little bit more about entrepreneurial kind of approaches in general, or just whatever comes to mind?
Yeah, it's funny. There's a difference between founding a company and being an executive and a CEO. So you can think of a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, like their job is to be a chief executive officer and like lead this very large scale organization. When you found a company, it's just like you're just very scrappy and you just decide to start something and you do it, and come hell or high water, you do it. And if that thing starts working, then you are woefully emotionally behind and functionally behind on the things you need to do in order to help that organization scale. Because I wasn't trained, I didn't go to business school, I have a degree in agriculture. I didn't know a lot of things, like I didn't know all the people we had to hire. I didn't know their titles. I didn't know their descriptions and what they were supposed to do. And so what I found myself doing all the time is saying like, oh my God, I need help, which is really a great thing. And if you think about leadership, I think it's not done enough, and saying like, I have this very clear vision for where we need to go and why. I just don't know how exactly to get there. Can you help me? And I found that it's unbelievably empowering to find people who are really, really good functionally at what you're not, and then getting out of their way. And I quickly learned that, because like we were adding thousands of users a day, and we had to hire for marketing and engineering, and the team was adding, 10, 15 people a quarter, and stuff was breaking all over the place. And we raised a significant amount of capital. And the sooner that I sort of like fired myself from functional roles, even support, like every single support ticket, I would try to answer within 5 to 10 minutes of when I started the company for the first 2 years. And then I hired someone who's better than me at it. And she's actually still at the company. I think it's her 8th year, which is amazing. So I think that's the biggest lesson, is that when something's growing so quickly, you have to learn to extract yourself and not necessarily work in the company day to day, but work on it. And that's and I don't mean that in the literal sense, that's really hard to do, because like I still like to talk to customers, but I also had to start leading versus just doing on a day-to-day basis.
Perfect. Fred, you have a question. Please introduce yourself as you start.
Yeah, hi, I'm Fred Delsey. I live in Honolulu, Hawaii, and I am a co-founder in a company called Unruler, which also tries to support teachers, school leaders, and students. And my question for you is, you talked about the situation where you're starting to grow very quickly as you're supporting these folks, and that's a great problem to have, a challenge to have. How do you encourage that growth, especially from the early stages? As you talked about kind of starting with a small group and getting them, supporting them and learning from them. How do you take the next step as you grow more quickly? Or how do you encourage that growth?
You mean for employees and team members, or customers?
No, for customers.
Oh, okay. And so if I understand your question correctly, is when you start growing, how do you, and I guess I don't understand. Can you ask one more time?
So yeah, how do you encourage the growth? So let's say, there's value, the folks are using your system, they're enjoying it. That's great. How do you get more and more people to use your system?
Oh, got it. Okay. So I have like 10 people using my thing, and how do we go to 100 and then go to 1,000, then go to like 30 million?
Right.
Got it. That is a good and hard question. There's a lot of ways to answer this. I think that the most important thing you could do is build something that people want. This isn't my brainiac knowledge saying this. This is Y Combinator, which is like a startup incubator that a lot of companies like Airbnb and Stripe went through, and Dropbox, all these companies that you use. That's their motto, to build something people want. That's the most important thing. And even if there's only 10 people using it, if they really, really love it, then if you keep kind of grinding on that problem, eventually I think it will start to grow. So that's the first part. One of the reasons I haven't talked too publicly about Omella until now, okay, and I've been working on it for quite some time, months, more than months, is because we hadn't built enough things where it was retaining really well. I think of retention of like this water bottle. If I have a hole in this water bottle, and if I fill the water bottle up entirely, all the water is going to fall out. That means my website and my app has bad retention. Kind of like, I guess you can make it an analog to a school. If you don't have great teachers, and therefore the students aren't learning and they churn or drop out or are failing, then it has bad retention, like something not good is happening. And so I think the first thing is to build something people want. The second thing is tactically to make sure that you have really good retention so that they keep using it. The third thing then is, if those two are true, which is great because most people don't even get that far, you build something someone wants and they keep using it, then you should just ask them, hey, Rachel, I heard you use Remind. Do you think you could share it with 3 people if you like it? Or hey, Janet, I heard that you had some feedback on Remind. Thank you so much. Do you have any ideas on how we could share it? Now, there are so many ways to skin a cat. I happen to be the type of entrepreneur that is extremely hands-on in building relationships with customers one-on-one. I was literally just texting with one of our first ever Remind teachers from 11 years ago named Craig Nobling, who teaches in Chatham, Nebraska, today, because he was asking me about a Remind feature, which I just answered, which I don't even know most of the features Remind has now because it's so big. But that's just my way of approaching it. It will get to a point where when you add so many users, you are incapable of doing that. And then it just becomes getting good at, call it like internet growth. And I don't have to get into that too much, but that means having a website, which is just like a billboard when you drive on a highway and you see a big billboard. You need to have a website that communicates what you do and why it's important to the person you want to talk to. And then make sure that you find a channel, whether it's SEO or whether it's email or whether it's referral marketing, to help them grow. The last part I'll say, and then I'm going to be quiet because this is a really big topic, is understanding the stages of growth for a product. Most people, I don't at least think most people know this. It's important to know though. It always starts with retention, which I talked about. You fill the bottle, and if the bottle's empty, then everything falls out. It's pointless, right? So if you have good retention and people love it, the next thing you want to focus on is like, well, how often do they come back? So if someone signs up for the site, if Rachel comes and signs up today, but then she never comes back, I don't have something very valuable. But if Janet comes today and every single day she keeps coming back, or every week she keeps coming back, I built something pretty valuable. So then I think, well, what's the next step? It's what's called activation, which means when Janet literally goes, or Janine goes to sign up on abcwebsite.com, and they enter their username and password, and then they create their first class or whatever the app does, they quickly get it. It's easy to understand, and they immediately get value. Those are like, that's the framework that we use from a quantitative standpoint to measure success. None of that matters when you have 100 users. Like, it's not that important, right? Because it's not statistically significant. But when you have 30 million, then it's a good metric to think about how to, like, to ask yourself, how are we doing? Like, how is our business actually performing? I hope that answers your question. That was a mouthful.
It did. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Great stuff. Let's shift gears slightly. And Brett, you mentioned that you have some questions for the group. So let's do one of those and let's see what we might be able to toss back your way.
Yeah, I'm most curious if you ever have to collect money, and if so, what for? And or if how money flows through your school. Some schools, if they're public, they don't do it at all. A lot of them do, and it's very like under the table via Venmo or cash. I would love to hear how you do it. I would love to hear if it's a problem or not and why. And I'm just going to be taking diligent notes.
Well, I'm at a public school. So, and I was just attending a meeting with our bookkeeper. So I think what you're developing, there is a huge need, but I think that it's tricky because there, obviously there's so many layers of bureaucracy, and every school district likes to do things in particular ways. And there's a lot of transparency that's required. But I think the good thing is that Remind is such a strong brand, and it's such a respected brand. And so I know this isn't Remind, I know this is another company, but I think if those things can be tied together, that's helpful. But unlike with Remind, there's going to need to be buy-in with the bookkeepers, and the bookkeepers, I think, would be a huge asset for you as you go forward with this, because they're the gatekeepers, and they're the people who are critical on the campuses. But the other piece I was going to say, I think now there's this move toward, obviously, like interoperability. And I think especially after this last year and a half, we are all looking for ways to increase the interoperability with the things we're using on our campuses. And that's why I think what you're talking about obviously you're developing it because you're already thinking about that, but I think there's such an opportunity right now. And the other piece, I'm kind of throwing a lot of things in here at the same time, but the crowdsourcing thing is huge, and there are rules around that. But I think if somebody could kind of help schools sort that out a little bit, and formalize that, or make channels more clear with an app, perhaps, there's a lot of room for growth with that.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I have two quick follow-ups. One, I want to meet your bookkeeper if you're open to it. I'm genuinely serious if she will or he will be open to meeting me.
Okay.
Email me. It's just Brett, BRETT at Omella, OMELLA.com. I would love to ask them questions. And two, I think I know what you mean by interoperability, which in that there's so many technology apps now, which there weren't in 2010, but there's so many, Remind included, and none of them talk well. And therefore, educators are super overwhelmed by having to manage all this fragmented data. Is that what you mean?
Yes. Yes.
Okay,
And I don't think we're harnessing it. Obviously, we're not. And that's leading to, the teacher burnout. And a lot of people are talking about that now. Like why are our systems that, our grading systems, our attendance systems, our other systems for accountability, why aren't they all speaking to each other? So that's a huge other piece, but I just think any way that can be, that can be tied in. I think, there's lots of little things, like to me, it does feel such a need. There's such a need, and there is such a need in the things you're trying to address with what you're developing now. I cannot even tell you how enormously helpful it would be. To me, it's just really tricky, like the barrier of when it comes to money, people will do things the old horrible way because at least they know they're not going to get into trouble. Like I'll do the thing that takes me 10 hours as long as I don't get fired, kind of. I mean, I'm kidding, but.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I totally get it. That's good perspective. Thank you.
Good deal. Janet, I think you have an answer for this one as well. So let us know where you are.
Hi, Janet Perez, Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm glad to be here. Currently, I don't deal with a lot of money, but I used to be an elementary school teacher, and the thought of it just gave me trauma because, right, it is the envelope, the coins, it's taking away from instruction. So I think having something digital is a great idea. And like Rachel said, there are all these bureaucratic things to consider. And then there's also for me, it's also access to making sure people have the technology to use what you're offering, the app. And because I work with people who are blind and visually impaired, it's also an accessibility. So like, making sure that it works with a screen reader, and that's not an additional barrier, because a lot of it's sad to say, we have all these systems for doing IEPs, and we have teachers who are blind and the system is not accessible to them, which becomes a barrier to really being competitively employed. So accessibility, yes, I think it's a great idea, but how do you, like Rachel said, weave it so it's not another thing to learn? Makes sense. Thank you.
Cool. For me, I'm thinking back to the work that I did as a high school teacher of Japanese language. We had the Silver Creek High School thunderously hip Japanese language program. Very proud of that. Wonderful students that I had, all that kind of thing. And once a year we do a fundraiser. And in doing that fundraiser, I was pretty darn OCD about this person has brought this much, and like everybody has spoken to, that required a lot of time. I am wondering if one element of the tool can be something where the person who donates, the parent or whoever it is, can essentially say, click, I know how much I have donated and to whom through this app. So, good. I see that I've given $12 to the Thunderously Hip Japanese Language Program, or the band, or for whatever it is. And so that becomes obvious that way. The teacher would be able to see, like, all of these people have given to my particular cause in this fashion, right? And that would be shareable by, like Rachel said, the bookkeeper. Mm-hmm. So that essentially there is a simplistic transparency to this that would, it just seems like that would save a lot of headaches along the way.
Yeah, we think so, because there's so many places inside an organization like a school where there's transactions happening. Mm-hmm. It could be everything from like a teacher doing a donation to, at the school level, a fundraiser, and there's like 100 teachers, another 30 faculty member, thousands of students. But then that's actually only money. There's also things like answering questions with documents, or even digital signatures. Like if you've ever taken kids on a field trip, and it's crazy that teachers have to walk to the museum with 100 stacks of paper and like saying here, 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 here.
Right.
And so it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier in my belief that if we build software right, it can like eliminate all of that inefficiency, so that the teacher just goes here, click in, and then they just get to see the dinosaurs versus having to manage permission slips.
Makes sense. So let's do one more question from the group before we wind down. Rachel, I believe you have one ready to go.
I think I was able to, I'm just, I'm still kind of thinking about all the things, but I think I was able to communicate my big thoughts earlier.
Excellent. All
But I
right.
will get in touch with my bookkeeper, and I will get in touch with you because she's amazing, and I'm sure she'd love to share her insights.
Cool. I love that. Thanks, Rachel.
I would imagine that a lot of teachers would be very happy to go to their bookkeepers and say, I think we may have something that can reduce our headaches by a great factor. And that is the promise, I think, of Omella. Brett, before we finish, I'll wind down with a few things, and then I'll hand it back to you for a final thought. But for everybody who has joined this recording, thank you for being part of it. For those of you who have been watching the recording on nextvista.org, thank you for giving it a look. We very much look for your ideas for how to make this something valuable to you. How can the work that entrepreneurs are doing, in order to make the schools better places for all of us, how can we help make that happen? If you have ideas on that front, I hope you will share them, and that we might be able to act on them with future programs with the Fascinating Folks series. So with that, I will hand it back to Brett for the final word before we stop recording.
Oh my gosh, this is like at the end of a late night talk show when you're supposed to say something funny, which I can't do. Yeah, the only thought I have with the state of the world and the pandemic is that I know that educators, whether they're on the call or they're watching this, are doing really important work, and it's extremely hard right now. And we appreciate it. And we're doing our very little part to try to help augment you, to give you more time to get back to leading. So thank you for coming, and hang in there.
Everyone, we look forward to seeing you again soon.